Hi, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska. I also teach regularly in Toronto, Canada. My guest today is Bob Leda, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in the Boston area. He's been a teacher for about 30 years. And we're going to talk today about our slightly different views on distance teaching, distance
Mm.
learning for the Alexander technique. Bob, welcome to the show.
Oh, glad to be here, Robert. Always happy to talk with you.
It's fun talking with you.
Yeah.
So here's before we start, maybe if you wouldn't mind giving a short description or definition of the Alexander technique.
Sure. For me, our territory is how you do what you do and who you are when you do it. And the Alexander technique is to explore this with all of our students.
Hmm. So both Bob and I do distance teaching
Yeah.
using Zoom, I assume in your
Yeah,
case as
using Zoom.
well.
Yeah.
And pretty much right now, we're recording this in August of 2020. I'd say the vast majority of Alexander technique teaching going on, certainly in the US, is on Zoom
Oh,
or
yes. Yeah.
similar platforms. And I, I think that Bob and I have slightly different views about the our preferences in terms of using Zoom for
Mm.
teaching or in person. And Bob, I think, is a little more people oriented than me, perhaps, or who knows. But
Right.
he would be happier if he were teaching in person. Is that
I
correct?
prefer it.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for teaching in person. There's a lot to be said for teaching remotely
Hmm.
as well, and we get a far broader reach,
Hmm.
with doing this.
Hmm.
You and I are using Zoom right now, and I think we both feel that's the best platform for it. I've used WebEx. The sound, was
Yeah.
terrible. Google Hangouts didn't work real well
Hmm.
as far as recording and all of that. I haven't tried to do anything with Microsoft Teams. So we'll see how the technology develops over the next year, I think.
Hmm.
And we might be having a very different conversation a year from now.
Hmm. But as of right now, if it were possible for you to have a student in person as opposed to online, you would
Yeah,
prefer that.
I would prefer that, yes.
And maybe it would be good for you to give that what you see as the advantage of that.
Sure.
I mean, one of them's pretty obvious, I think, but I'll
Well,
leave it to you to
yeah,
describe the.
it's more the where are you trying to go with a lesson?
Hmm.
What are we really trying to do?
Hmm.
I believe that what we're trying to unlock for our students is parts of them, capabilities of them, all of that, that they don't realize that they have already.
Right.
And I see the use of our hands as really the thing that takes them over the line to get there.
Hmm.
As a form, when I'm doing a lesson in person, I'll let the person get as far as they can on their own, and then step in with a little hand stuff to say, oh, and this is also possible.
Hmm.
To here's the things that haven't occurred to you yet, so that you can possibly evolve into them. I'm having a hard time getting to that when teaching online. I've got sort of ways, sort of not, but it's much easier when you're in person.
Hmm.
And the connection um, between myself and the student, because it's three-dimensional and right there, is different from the online experience where you really have to extrapolate a lot. So your use of vision is a lot different too,
Hmm.
and I haven't completely adjusted to that yet.
Right. So for sure, a teacher with a even reasonably good hands uh,
Hmm.
ability can elicit a pretty dramatic improvement instantly in someone's use and functioning.
Yeah.
And I think the argument there is, well, it may be a bit temporary because it's coming from outside, but first of all, it gives the student a realization that this is possible,
Hmm.
and and perhaps to some extent it actually gets incorporated in their uh, use patterns. I mean, some people have had lessons from teachers who only used hands-on and barely spoke,
Yeah.
and have improved from that.
Yeah, I
So
was never a
it's,
big fan of those, but yes, I
well,
know.
my
Some
first
teachers can do them.
Alexander experience was exactly that.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
for me at that time in my life, that might have been the best approach.
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
for the me back then, I think just getting zapped over and over again and having the results show up outside of lessons, which is where they showed up for me,
Yeah.
got me so intrigued that I eventually became an Alexander teacher.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I mean, we're trying to pique the students' curiosity somehow,
Right, right,
and have them be willing to go through this exploration. Yeah.
right.
Now, one thing I like when I've seen you teach, Robert, is that I really like the way you use language. And I think language, when you're in the online environment, becomes more important.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to replace a little bit the things that you can get with your
Mm-hmm.
hands.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found that you had to change your language working online? Did things
I
change that
did,
way?
and
Yeah.
when I first started teaching online, I was still mostly doing individual lessons in person.
Mm,
And what I found is that my online teaching affected my in-person teaching dramatically.
mhm,
Uh, I was, forced to not rely on hands
mhm.
and at
Right.
first that seemed um, you know, like a missing option. But and I think for some students, I think there are some students who I teach online. I wish I could just show up briefly in their house and give them a little direct hands-on
Yeah, yeah.
experience. So there is that. I think for some students and some teachers that's a downside. But what I have found is that there is a gigantic upside that I had not really expected, which is
Mm,
that, in a typical private individual lesson, you help them do things, you maybe give them some ideas to think about, maybe you introduce them to Alexander directions or whatever, and
mm.
you send them off and maybe see them next week. And for me, one of the first questions I would ask is, well, how did you do with the project?
Yep, yep, yep,
And
yep.
7 or 8 times out of 10, well, I was just too busy. I just
Yeah,
didn't think about it, right? I know.
yeah.
I think all teachers have had that. With online teaching, that doesn't happen near as much. And I think
Hmm.
the reason is, at least for me, it doesn't, is that it's absolutely clear to the student that they are a student, not a recipient of some external zapping, so to speak.
Right.
And and I think it makes it clear for the teacher as well, that this is a very different. This is not so much not a therapy. This is a
Hmm.
teaching process, and given that, they're much more likely to think, well, okay, so I have some things I can work on that I've been given. I've also been given the video so I can see how things worked out in the lesson, and that can be very eye-opening for students
Yeah, let me
sometimes.
interrupt you there because I think that's one of the big pluses
That's a huge
with
plus.
teaching with Zoom, particularly if you're working with activities, the student can see themselves by using the spotlight feature so they really
Hmm.
feel the whole screen.
Hmm.
And so to bring together for the student visual impulses
Right.
and kinesthetic impulses at the same time, you get something where the sum is really greater than the parts. And I think that part is just fantastic.
Yeah,
I don't know if
that's
you've run into this. There seems to be a lot less charge looking at yourself in a screen than looking at yourself in a mirror. You
hmm,
know, the people
yeah,
who look themselves in the mirror, it's, oh man, is my hair all right?
yeah,
All of that, that kind of thing. And I don't see that as much when teaching online. I don't know if you've found the same thing or not.
yeah. Um, yeah, I can't really comment on that. I
Mm.
will often roll out a mirror for someone to look at if they don't believe it when I tell them they're not not leaning back or whatever.
Right,
Um,
right.
but I have to say, some is a lot of times a sideways view of somebody that they can watch head on is an amazing experience,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
that's tough to
mm-hmm.
do with mirrors. I mean, they have to turn their head to see. You could use a camcorder, obviously, but
Right.
to me, having that video available for the students to watch, and perhaps I've explained a direction I'd like them to explore, and have explained what the what the traps are of the direction, and
Mm-hmm,
it's
mm-hmm.
stuff like that. They get a chance to listen to it again. Some students say they watch them 2 or 3 times. Some students are not that interested in the videos I found,
Yeah,
but
right, right,
but for
right.
the ones who do, and it's easy enough to do. You just send them the video
Yeah,
after
yeah.
the lesson. But to me, the really big thing is students taking more responsibility for themselves right from the beginning. It's clear at the very beginning of the process that this is not me fixing them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
That's such a big hurdle to climb too.
it is,
Yeah.
yeah. I do think, um, for me, I don't think I would be doing teaching online the way I do if I hadn't had certain experiences early on, especially working with Marge Barstow,
Mm,
because she's an Alexander teacher who passed away in 1995. Um, she obviously taught in person, but she taught groups, and often large groups of people, and she used her hands very sparingly. She would use them when she felt it was important, but she did not just jump in there typically with hands-on work.
yeah, she's
And
one of my
yeah,
heroes.
she's my teacher I've been most influenced by.
Mm,
So that, and also there was a huge emphasis on other people in the groups observing. So we got really good at seeing things,
mm-hmm.
watching people, and seeing what they were doing. So that's helped me a lot.
Yeah, I'm
But
glad you brought up seeing things because observation, I think, really becomes even more critical.
mm-hmm,
Critical meaning important.
mm-hmm,
Even more critical when you're teaching online to
right,
see not only what is seemingly happening, but what might happen, what
mm-hmm,
can potentially happen, and to see a path to get there is a tremendous skill to refine.
mm-hmm,
I think
mm-hmm,
for every teacher,
yeah,
and not to not settle for your first impression, but
mm-hmm,
build on it as time goes on is
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
another one that I found to be very valuable.
yeah. And of course, there's what we might call the economic factor, or yeah, we could call it the economic factor, that when you're teaching online, your potential student body, number of people potentially who you could teach, increases multiple
Right,
times.
right,
Even if you're
right.
living in a big city like Boston, the world's a lot bigger than Boston.
Well, you know what's funny about that? There was a day during July where in the morning I taught a class in England because it was
Mhm.
the middle of their day.
Right.
In the middle of the day, I did some work with people here in Boston. And then in the evening, I taught a class in Korea because it was their next morning.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't at
Yeah.
all have been possible if we didn't have this. Fortunately,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
infrastructure is getting there to where you can do that kind of thing.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Korea because that's an interesting country from an
Hmm.
Alexander Technique point of view and teaching. Most Koreans speak English, which is a big help if you're American, like we are. And Korea, unlike America, has an incredible internet infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even in the tiniest fishing village, the minimal acceptable speed is half a gig, which is, for most of us, that'd be really amazing.
It'd be really expensive, is what it would
And
be. Yeah,
well,
yeah,
the other thing is it's free for everybody.
yeah.
And you have a culture in Korea and in some other Southeast Asian countries. You want to learn a skill, well, where do you go? You find a teacher online. If
Hmm.
your kid wants to learn Tai Chi or the violin, or you want to take a cooking class, that's a very common approach in a lot of countries.
Yes, yes.
And so when someone hears about the Alexander technique, well, there's no teacher here right now, but hey, let's see who's teaching online.
Well, my pals were telling me that within the last month, I couldn't say when, but some famous media star talked about having Alexander lessons.
Hmm.
And after that, all of a sudden, their referrals went up, 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 and they
Hmm.
started to get very full practices as a
Hmm.
result of that.
Yeah,
So it's a very media intensive country. Yes, absolutely.
yeah, and the other thing that I think about online teaching that I don't think most of us consider enough is that for someone to come for an in-person session, even if they live in the same city and it's maybe a half-hour trip to get to your place, well, that's in a half hour and then a half hour back. And what most people these days, maybe a little less with the pandemic, but then on the other hand,
Mm.
they're not traveling anyway. But most people in a normal course of events, their most precious commodity is their time. And
Yeah.
you can, you know, if you can save someone an hour of travel time, that's a huge factor.
I was really surprised it must have been about a year ago,
Hmm.
because I teach at Berklee College of Music,
Yeah.
and they had done surveys of the students around them. So they had been born after 2000.
Hmm.
And that group valued speed over accuracy. They
Hmm.
preferred to get something quickly than to get it, accurate and right. And I'm still trying to put my arms around all of that. So how do
Yeah.
we start to live in, because you and I are a different generation from them, how do we start to live in this digital world and still offer what we have to offer, which is, very powerful and very useful, I
Hmm.
think, for the students. So it's an ongoing adaptation, but it's real. We can't pretend that it's not happening. Yeah,
Hmm.
the because I think the in-person stuff is going to get less and less and less as time goes on, just because people live digitally.
Hmm. That's my sense. I think if the pandemic were to end in a month or two and everything snapped back to normal by the end of the year, the one thing that would not snap back in the same way would be Alexander delivery system. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people would still want to teach online. What I've seen is that from people I've talked to and people who are on Facebook and talk about this,
Mm.
teachers, that many of them kind of went into online teaching reluctantly. It
Hmm.
was I was the only choice,
Yeah,
and
right.
they were dubious, and they would start very cautiously, maybe working with existing students or family
Hmm.
members or friends, which is a really smart thing to do.
It is.
Offer a few free sessions to people and say, hey, I just want to try this out, become familiar with the technology, with which, thanks to Zoom, is pretty simple. They've got it down, I gotta say. And more times than I can recount, they'll say, I was amazed at how it helped. I was amazed at the results of what I did online.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
sometimes they'll say, I think I over relied on my hands before.
Oh, many people have said that.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
that's common. So
Hmm.
I think at the very least, it's transforming the way people teach in general, including in
Mm.
person. But I do think online teaching is going to be, I think that's the future of Alexander teaching to a large extent. And maybe online lessons will be kind of a premium thing you do if you really want to have that direct contact. Who
Yeah,
knows?
the thing that I worry about, they have all those studies of infants who are deprived of touch and they
Hmm.
grow up very badly.
Hmm.
Uh, and there's something, I know we're not therapeutic, but there's something therapeutic about touch.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of online, I can't say that, a lot of teachers who are scared to use touch. And I think that's a bad thing.
You mean
You know,
in their in-person teaching?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Mhm.
just, there's so much more to be gained than lost by that deep and direct contact that I think we have to find out ways to approximate that in the online world.
Mhm.
I've been working with, I haven't really gotten anywhere with it yet, aside for me, I can do it, but I can't teach it. Seeing with your heart, touching with your heart, virtually touching somebody through the screen.
Mhm.
It's kind of woo-woo, but I see results, and over time, I hope to refine it into something that I can, give to everybody else too,
Mhm. Yeah.
because we need that. We need that.
So, is there anything else you want to say on the
No, I mean,
topic?
the thing with all of it, look, it's the way the world is, and it's the
Hmm.
way the world's going to be. And if you're an Alexander teacher, figure it out, because
Yeah,
you have to.
and and there are some Alexander teachers who are never going to want to teach online, and they're that's their
Prerogative.
orientation and
Yeah,
prerogative for sure.
yeah.
And I respect that, but I do suggest that they at least give it a shot.
Hmm.
You know, not not do it because they have a bias against it, but not do it because they tried it a bit and it really wasn't successful.
Right,
I
right. No,
think
I'm
that
with you. I'm with you.
would make sense.
Yeah, even though I mean we have our views, I think, are largely compatible.
Oh,
It's do I
absolutely,
prefer
yeah.
in person? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
But I'm trying for myself to try to bring the depth of that in-person experience to online lessons,
Hmm.
and I hope we all collectively can move forward that way.
Hmm. Well, let's end on that note.
That sounds pretty good. Okay.
My guest today has been Bob Leda, an Alexander teacher in Boston. I'll put a link to his website, and if well, you could live anywhere and have a lesson with him. But
Good.
when in-person lessons become available, there he is, available, willing and able.
Ready, willing, and able. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Robert. This has
oh,
been
and
grand, man.
thank you for being on the show.
Yep. Okay.